There is a name so embedded in the architecture of American life that most people have stopped noticing it. It is on the buildings, it is in the science, it is in the medicine, it is in the policy institutes, the universities, the art museums, the public health agencies. It shaped the American oil industry, helped create the American financial system, funded the development of modern medicine, and quietly influenced the foreign policy of the world's most powerful nation for more than a century. The name is Rockefeller, and the story of this family is not a story about money. It is a story about what happens when money becomes so large that it ceases to be personal and becomes structural, when a single family's accumulated wealth transforms itself into institutions so durable that the family itself becomes almost irrelevant to their operation. Most people know the name. Almost nobody knows the full story. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1839 in Richford, New York, the son of a traveling salesman and conman who went by the name Big Bill and was, by most accounts, a spectacular liar who sold patent medicines and occasionally practiced bigamy. He was absent for months at a time, reappearing with cash and gifts, and disappeared entirely from John's life before John was grown. John took almost nothing from his father in terms of character. He was methodical, patient, deeply religious, and possessed of a quality that would define his entire career: an absolute refusal to pay more for anything than it was worth, and an equally absolute determination to extract from every transaction every advantage that could legally, and sometimes illegally, be extracted. He kept meticulous personal account books from the age of 16, recording every cent he earned and every cent he gave to charity. He tithed to his church before he had much to tithe. He went into business at 16, working as a bookkeeper at a small produce company in Cleveland. At 23, he entered the oil business. The year was 1863, and the commercial oil industry was 2 years old. What happened next is one of the most consequential business stories in history. Rockefeller did not discover oil. He did not drill for oil. What he understood, with a clarity that his competitors lacked entirely, was that the oil business was not about finding oil. It was about refining it, transporting it, and controlling the infrastructure through which it moved. He built his first refinery in Cleveland in 1863. Within 5 years, his company was the largest refinery in Cleveland. Within 10 years, it was the largest in the world. In 1870, he incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio, and then began what historians have called one of the most ruthless and systematic campaigns of business consolidation in the history of capitalism. Rockefeller's method was straightforward. He approached rival refiners with a choice: sell to Standard Oil at a fair price, or be undercut, isolated, and driven out of business. He negotiated secret rebates with the railroads, agreements in which Standard Oil paid lower shipping rates than its competitors, and the railroads kicked back a portion of what competitors paid directly to Standard Oil. This meant that every barrel of oil a competitor shipped was, in effect, subsidizing Rockefeller. His competitors were paying to accelerate their own destruction. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of all oil refining in the United States. By 1882, Rockefeller restructured the operation into the Standard Oil Trust, one of the first and most powerful corporate trust structures in American history, a legal mechanism that allowed dozens of ostensibly separate companies to be controlled by a single board of trustees under a unified strategy. Standard Oil set the price of kerosene in America. Standard Oil set the price of refined oil in Europe. Standard Oil owned the pipelines, the barrel factories, the tank cars, the warehouses. It was not a monopoly in the technical sense. It did not own every company in the industry. It simply controlled enough of the infrastructure that operating outside its reach was, for most practical purposes, impossible.
The backlash came slowly, then all at once. Standard Oil's practices were not a secret in the industry. Every refiner in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia knew how the system worked. They simply had no power to stop it. The railroads needed Standard Oil's volume more than they needed the goodwill of any individual competitor. The courts moved slowly. Politicians who challenged Standard Oil found themselves facing an organization with enormous resources and an army of lawyers who could delay proceedings for years. Ida Tarbell was a journalist whose father had been a small oil producer destroyed by Standard Oil's practices. Between 1902 and 1904, she published a 19-part investigative series in McClure's magazine, documenting in precise detail how Standard Oil had used secret railroad deals, industrial espionage, and predatory pricing to eliminate its competition. It was one of the most influential pieces of journalism in American history. It turned public opinion decisively against Rockefeller, and it accelerated the political momentum that led to the 1911 Supreme Court decision ordering Standard Oil to be broken up under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Rockefeller was already retired by the time the decision came down. He had been out of day-to-day management for years. He spent his mornings playing golf and his afternoons giving away dimes to children he passed on the street, a habit so well documented and so peculiar that it became a kind of strange symbol of the contradiction at the center of his life. The man who had built a monopoly through practices that destroyed thousands of small businesses distributed coins to strangers with a cheerful regularity that suggested genuine personal warmth. He was, by the time of the breakup, already one of the richest men who had ever lived, and the breakup, in a twist of historical irony, made him richer.
The 34 successor companies into which Standard Oil was divided, among them Standard Oil of New Jersey, which became Exxon, Standard Oil of New York, which became Mobil, Standard Oil of California, which became Chevron, all held stock that immediately appreciated when the trust was dissolved. Rockefeller held shares in all of them. His net worth increased substantially in the years immediately following the court order that was supposed to curtail his power. John D. Rockefeller died in 1937 at the age of 97. By the time of his death, he had given away approximately half of his fortune, an estimated $540 million over the course of his lifetime, the equivalent of several billion dollars in today's terms. But it was not the philanthropy itself that shaped the 20th century. It was what the philanthropy built. In 1901, Rockefeller founded the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, which became one of the premier biomedical research institutions in the world. In 1902, he founded the General Education Board, which funded schools across the American South at a time when public education for Black Americans was almost entirely defunded. In 1913, he established the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the largest and most influential philanthropic organizations in history, which exists to this day and has shaped global health policy, agricultural development, scientific research, and social science for more than a century. The Rockefeller Foundation funded the research that led to the yellow fever vaccine. It helped establish the modern field of public health. It funded the Green Revolution, the transformation of agricultural productivity in Asia and Latin America that is credited with preventing hundreds of millions of deaths from famine. It shaped the development of the social sciences in America by funding university departments and research programs at a scale that no government or private donor could match. John D. Rockefeller Jr., who managed the family's philanthropic interests through the first half of the 20th century, was in many respects the architect of the Rockefeller presence in public life as it came to be understood. He funded the construction of Rockefeller Center in New York. He purchased and donated the land in Manhattan on which the United Nations headquarters was built. He funded the restoration of Colonial Williamsburg. He created Colonial Williamsburg's version of American history, a carefully curated, sanitized, and enormously influential presentation of the colonial past that shaped how millions of Americans understood their own origins. This is the pattern that runs through the entire Rockefeller story. The family did not simply give money away. It gave money away in ways that built institutions, shaped disciplines, created official versions of contested realities, and embedded Rockefeller influence into the permanent infrastructure of American and global life. The third generation, the 5 sons of John D. Rockefeller Jr., known informally as the Brothers, took this further still. John D. Rockefeller III focused on Asia policy and population issues, funding the Population Council, and helping shape American foreign policy thinking on demographic questions in the developing world. Lawrence Rockefeller became a pioneering figure in venture capital and conservation, funding early technology companies and environmental protection organizations simultaneously. Winthrop Rockefeller moved to Arkansas, became its governor, and was a significant force in Southern Republican politics at a time when the region was transforming from solid Democrat to something more complex. David Rockefeller was chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, which became one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world under his leadership. He was also the co-founder with Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Trilateral Commission, a private forum of senior political and business leaders from North America, Europe, and Japan that was established in 1973 to promote cooperation among the world's democratic industrialized nations, and which has been a source of conspiracy theories and serious academic debate ever since in roughly equal measure.
And Nelson Rockefeller served 4 terms as governor of New York, was vice president of the United States under Gerald Ford, and ran for the Republican presidential nomination 3 times. He is the reason New York State has the largest public university system in the country. He is also the reason New York State enacted the Rockefeller drug laws in 1973, mandatory minimum sentencing laws for drug offenses that many criminal justice scholars regard as one of the principal drivers of mass incarceration in America. The brothers were not a unified bloc. They disagreed on politics, on priorities, on the use of the family fortune. but collectively they occupied positions of influence across finance, government, philanthropy, international policy, and media that no single generation of any American family had occupied before or has occupied since.
It is worth pausing on the scale of what was built, because the numbers strain credibility even now. The Rockefeller Foundation alone has distributed more than $20 billion in grants since its founding. Rockefeller University has produced 40 Nobel Prize winners. The philanthropic apparatus that John D. Rockefeller set in motion in the early 20th century is still operating in the 21st, still shaping global health priorities, still funding research programs, still convening the people who make decisions about how the world's poorest populations are treated. The critics of the Rockefeller legacy make a serious case. The philanthropic institutions, they argue, were not simply generous, they were instruments of influence. The Rockefeller Foundation funded the development of what became known as the Flexner Report, a 1910 study of American medical schools that recommended the closure of most existing institutions and the standardization of medical education around a model heavily influenced by pharmaceutical research. Critics argue this effectively marginalized alternative medical traditions and created a medical establishment with a structural dependency on pharmaceutical industry funding that persists to this day. The Foundation's role in the Green Revolution has been questioned by development economists, who argue that the agricultural technologies it promoted created dependency on chemical inputs, disrupted traditional farming systems, and ultimately concentrated agricultural power in the hands of a small number of seed and chemical companies. And the Trilateral Commission, whatever its actual intentions, created a model of private global governance in which senior figures from government, finance, and academia met regularly outside democratic accountability to coordinate policy positions that were subsequently implemented through official channels. The Rockefeller family today is in its fifth and sixth generations. The fortune has been divided and subdivided across hundreds of heirs. The Rockefeller Foundation continues to operate with an endowment of several $billion.
Rockefeller University continues to produce Nobel Prize winners. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund continues to make grants in areas including democratic practice, sustainable development, and peacebuilding. The oil companies that the original Standard Oil became, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, are now among the largest corporations on Earth. The Rockefeller family no longer controls them. But the system of vertical integration, infrastructure ownership, and market control that John D. Rockefeller invented in the Cleveland refineries of the 1860s remains the template on which the modern energy industry is built. There is a question that runs underneath all of this that is genuinely difficult to answer. John D. Rockefeller built his fortune through practices that were, by any reasonable measure, predatory, that destroyed thousands of businesses, eliminated competition, and concentrated in the hands of one man and one company a degree of control over a critical resource that democratic societies generally try very hard to prevent. And then he gave much of that fortune away in ways that funded vaccines, universities, public health systems, and scientific institutions that have saved and improved hundreds of millions of lives. How do you weigh that? The harm was done to a specific set of people at a specific moment in history. The benefits accrued to people across a century and a half who had no connection to the original harm and no awareness that what was helping them had any connection to a refinery in Cleveland in 1863. This is not a comfortable question. It does not resolve into a simple verdict of good or evil, benefactor or villain. It resolves into something more unsettling, a recognition that the structures we live inside, the hospitals, the universities, the international organizations, the research programs, the very shape of what we call modern medicine and modern agriculture and modern global governance, were partly built by money that was accumulated through the systematic destruction of the people who got in the way.
The Rockefeller name is on the buildings. The question of what that means has not been settled. It has been